Howdy, everybody. This is Alma Bean with another episode of Bean on the Scene, and let's get right to it. First things first, there is no new updates as far as the transfer portal or any scheduling for BYU, Utah, or Utah State. And the reason why I specifically mentioned scheduling is you're probably thinking, Alma, wasn't BYU and Utah's Big 12 schedules just released before your last episode? Yes, they were, but Utah State's Mountain West conference schedule has not been released yet. So until then, there's nothing to share. So let's move right into college basketball, which we're going to go ahead and start with the BYU men's team. They started their week with a tough conference opponent as they took on number 20 Arizona at home. In the first half, it looked like BYU was going to give Arizona a run for their money as they were tied at 41 apiece at the half. BYU was keeping it close till just before the 7-minute mark when Jaden Bradley, who had 17 points, 4 rebounds, and 2 assists, got Arizona the lead any way he could, accounting for 11 of Arizona's 13 points over a 3-minute period, which was a layup, a 3-point shot, and 6 free throws. Diego Demon, who had 16 points, 3 rebounds, and 3 assists, he took 20 shots and made 7 of those, and it proved to not be enough as BYU lost 85-74. After that difficult loss, BYU had to travel to Cincinnati, and with Cincinnati having a 3-8 Big 12 record, this game looked like it may have been in BYU's favor. But now, similar to BYU's previous game, this one was pretty close going into the half as BYU led 42-39. But Cincinnati did put the pedal to the metal to start the second half, going on a 22-2 run to start the second half. During that stretch spanning 7 minutes and 36 seconds, BYU shot 6 shots, made none of them, and they also had 2 free throws and 4 turnovers, which again, those free throws were not made. But Jizzle James, who had 24 points on 9 of 14 shooting, 6 of 8 from the perimeter, and the Bearcats outscored the Cougars 45-24 in the second half, leading to an 84-66 victory for Cincinnati. Even with those 2 devastating losses, according to Joe Lunardi's Bracketology, he still believes BYU has a chance to make it into the March Madness tournament, as he currently has them listed as one of the last 4 in. Now, if BYU wants to stay in that conversation, they're going to need to continue winning and winning fast. And their first opportunity is going to come tonight on Tuesday, February 11th. They're going to be facing West Virginia on the road, who is currently number 9 in Joe Lunardi's bracketology. It's a very tough competition for BYU, but that game will be broadcasted on CBS Sports Network starting at 5 p.m. Mountain Time. And then their next game they have this week is going to be on Saturday, February 15th, against Kansas State, which I believe should be a pretty even game for them, just because they do have an even conference record with BYU, but their 12-11 overall record means that BYU should be able to try and pull this one out, but I will consider it a must win if they want to stay within the March Madness conversation. Now, for the BYU women's team, after a confident win at Arizona State, BYU had to take on UCF at home, who just won their first conference game of the season going into Provo. And just like I said in the last episode, I expected this game to go similar to their game against Arizona State. Didn't realize how similar it would be because in the first, third, and fourth quarter, they were only off by 2 points as far as scoring differential from their game against UCF and Arizona State. So the game was so similar that BYU got a 73-66 win, which, if you remember, their win against Arizona State was 77-67. So again, not that far off. But with having that confidence, getting the win against UCF, BYU then had to go on the road to face a very tough Baylor team who is currently ranked 7th in Joe Lunardi's bracketology. Baylor showed why they're a dominant force in college basketball as BYU only held the lead for 2 minutes and 52 seconds in the first quarter and never saw it again as Dariana Littlepage Buggs, who had 26 points and 15 rebounds, and the Bears got the 83-71 win. which, I mean, is very impressive from the Baylor Bears, but BYU just stood no chance against that team, and it's very unfortunate, especially coming down the stretch, with that loss giving them a 3-9 record in Big 12 play. But they do have the upcoming games to look forward to, but this week is not the week to be looking forward to, because tonight, on Tuesday, February 11th, they will be at number 11 TCU, which is a number 3 seed in Lenardi's bracketology. And to put that into perspective, Baylor was 7. Uh, so I expect that game to be very difficult for BYU. But then they also have another game on Saturday, February 15th, at home versus number 20 Oklahoma State, which is also considered a number 7 seed. So this should be a very tough stretch for BYU. Um, at this point, I don't expect them to make a push to try and make it into the Women's March Madness tournament, but they could be the person that could spoil everyone else's hopes to get into that tournament. So we'll see what BYU can do. Now, for the Utah men's team, as expected, Utah's game versus Colorado was a nice pick-me-up game for them. Gabe Madsen was able to get into his groove, scoring 17 points on 5 of 10 shooting, 4 of 7 from the perimeter, and their 72-59 win. But their game at West Virginia did not go as well as their Colorado game did. Javon Small, who had 14 points, 4 rebounds, and 8 assists, along with Amani Hansberry, who had 17 points, 7 rebounds, and 4 assists, were able to handle business in the Big 12, jumping Utah in the standings with the 72-61 win for the Mountaineers. So Utah had one really nice win to start off the week and then ended off their week with a pretty bad loss. But their upcoming games, they do have a game tonight, Tuesday, February 11th, against the Cincinnati Bearcats on the road. This is the second time that they will be meeting each other this season. Utah won their previous matchup 69-66, but I do expect this game to be a tough rematch. But then they also have another tough game this week on Saturday, February 15th, against number 17 Kansas, who is the number 4 seed in Joe Lunardi's bracketology. But something that could work in Utah's favor is that Kansas has lost 3 of their last 5 games, where they have lost to Houston, then beat UCF, then lost to Baylor, then beat Iowa State, and then capping it off losing to Kansas State. And that game you can find on ESPN on Saturday evening. Now, for the Utah women's team, going into the week on a 3-game winning streak, they're looking to help their seeding as they took on 2 of the bottom teams of the Big 12. Utah kept Texas Tech within reach for a majority of their game, but even with a lackluster performance from Gianna Neepkins, Utah pulled away with a 70-64 win. Now, with that game being as close as it was, Utah's game against UCF looked like a cakewalk. Neepkins was able to bounce back from her previous performance and had 32 points, 4 rebounds, and 1 assist on 10 of 11 shooting, 6 of 11 from the perimeter in their 95-51 win. So after that narrow win against Texas Tech, having a large win such as the one that they had against UCF will definitely help them a lot. But their next game is going to be tomorrow, Wednesday, February 12th, at home versus Colorado, which they are in the middle of the pack. They are considered the next 4 out, according to Lunardi's bracketology. And they will also have a game on Saturday, February 15th, at Arizona State, which is near the bottom of the Big 12 standings with a 2-10 conference record and an 8-16 record overall. So those women, they definitely have a lot to play for. They're still pretty heavily seeded, if I'm not mistaken. So they will easily make their way into that conversation unless something dramatic really happens to this Utah team and they just completely collapse. But every win counts for them right now to try and get the easier path towards the championship. Now, for the Utah State men's team, after their embarrassing loss to New Mexico, USU is looking to bounce back and keep their high seed hopes in March alive. Now, Fresno State, they you would have thought that it would be an easy win, unless uh, their game against New Mexico really hung up over them. But we'll see what happens. But first, the Aggies did have to travel up to Laramie to face the Cowboys of Wyoming. Utah State looked as if they were trying to force plays early, and in this game, it just wasn't allowing them to get into their flow. So the Aggies were actually trailing 35-30 going into halftime, which is not a very good thing to see, especially since Wyoming is not considered hefty competition for the Aggies. Um, but in the second half, it seemed like they kind of gelled a little bit more and that they were trying to force more contact because in the second half, 18 of Utah State's 24 made free throws took place in the second half. So it kind of just felt like it was a battle from the free throw line. And USU's free throws, they ended up saving them in this one as they pulled away a narrow 71-67 win over Wyoming. Now, after finishing their 10th game of the season, where the games were within 5 points, which after their game against Wyoming, they now have an 8-2 record in games that were within 5 points. USU traveled to a very struggling Fresno State. Uh, USU, they looked like they were playing with their food to start off this game. They had a 16-0 run that was led by Ian Martinez, who finished the game with 30 points, 8 rebounds, and 3 assists, helping USU have a convincing 50-31 lead going into the locker room. This was embarrassing enough to be down by 19 points and allowing another team to score 50, but enough was enough for Fresno State, and they definitely answered back. Jalen Weaver, who had 20 points, 6 rebounds, and 3 assists, did what he could to help out the Bulldogs and try and outscore the Aggies, which they did 50-39. But if you can do the math, that was not enough to stop USU as they got the 89-81 win. Now, for Utah State, their upcoming games they have is going to start tonight, Tuesday, February 11th, at home versus Colorado State. That game, if you want to watch it, you can catch it on FS1 starting at 9 p.m. Mountain Time. Or if you want to tune into the KSL Sports Zone with Scotty G on 97.5 FM and 1280 AM, the pregame for that game will start at 8:30 p.m. Mountain Time. But they also have another game this week, and it will be on Sunday, February 16th at New Mexico on CBS Sports Network at 2 p.m. Mountain Time. Or once again, just like tonight's game, if you want to tune in at the KSL Sports Zone with Scotty G on 97.5 FM and 1280 AM, pregame will start at 11:30 p.m. Mountain Time. And in my opinion, and honestly, it's probably not even an opinion, this is a must. Utah State has to beat New Mexico if they want to compete for that top seeding in the Mountain West. And with how Utah State has been playing, hopefully they can gain some confidence against Colorado State. But they must beat New Mexico if they want to keep their high seeding hopes alive. Now, for Utah State's women's, I'm not going to spend too much time on it. My intuition was correct. 2 more losses. Their next game is tomorrow, Wednesday, February 12th at Colorado State, and then Saturday, February 15th at San Diego State. 2 road games. Not too confident about it. Honestly, at this point, just hang it up. You're 2-21. It's rough, and I really wish I could sit and watch those games, but it is very tough with what those score differentials are. Now, Utah Valley. Last week, I mentioned that probably with their loss to Grand Canyon University, they probably won't be up for the Cinderella story anymore. But I was proven wrong. After checking Joe Lenardi's bracketology, he hasn't ruled them out yet, and they are currently a 14 seed in his chart. And they got 2 convincing wins against UT Arlington with a 94-73 win, and Tarleton State with an 81-56 win. UVU, they'll be back in action on Saturday, February 15th, to face the Southern Utah T-Birds or Thunderbirds, however you want to say it out there, but they are considered the bottom of the WAC, so this should hopefully be an easy win for Utah Valley, so then we can have a Cinderella story to cheer for come March. now that we have all of the collegiate sports out of the way, let's dive into some Utah Jazz basketball, which might already be antagonizing, uh, gruesome to most. But Wednesday, they had their game against the Golden State Warriors, and storylines were hitting before tip off even happened. I was taking photos of Steph Curry speaking with Ryan Smith during his warm ups, and it all took place behind Lindy Waters III before Steve Kerr came across the court, calling both of them to go into the locker room for a private meeting. Now, what really threw me off about this entire interaction was that Steph didn't talk to anyone on his way to that locker room. And, that's not a normal thing for him, out of character for him, as you might say. Because normally when he goes to the locker room, he'll dap some people up, he'll say hi to some fans, maybe take a photo or two, sign a couple of things, and then go, no matter what the sequence is. But he had his blinders on and went straight to the locker room. Um, but even when he returned back to the court after that private locker room meeting, he did not talk to anyone. He didn't really make any eye contact with any fans. He had his hood back up. And even when he was going for a ball, just asking the ball boy for a ball, it didn't look like he even said anything to them. It just hand out, give me a ball, let me get back to it. Um, and come to find out, that private meeting was to announce that Jimmy Butler was traded from the Miami Heat to the Golden State Warriors, which, oddly enough, the Utah Jazz had their hands in this trade. Now, as far as the details of this trade, Golden State, they received Jimmy Butler from Miami, 2 second-round picks from Miami, and cash consideration from Miami. Miami themselves, they received Andrew Wiggins from Golden State, Kyle Anderson from Golden State, Davion Mitchell from Toronto, and then a protected first round pick in 2025 from Golden State. Then the Utah Jazz, as I had stated, they received KJ Martin, that went from Philadelphia to Detroit to end up leading into Utah. Josh Richardson, who came from Miami, a 2028 second round pick, which came from Philly to Detroit and now Utah, and then a 2031 second round pick from Miami and cash consideration from Miami. Now, Detroit, they got Dennis Schroeder from Golden State to Utah, then to Detroit, and then Lindy Waters III from Golden State, and then a 2031 second round pick from Golden State. And then Toronto, they received PJ Tucker from Utah, a 2026 second round pick from Golden State, and cash consideration. So there were a lot of moving parts to make sure that this trade happened. And if you noticed, I mentioned players going from one team to the next. Originally, when the trade was announced, Dennis Schroeder went to Utah, and people were joking like, "Oh, he can just go to the locker room across the hallway." Well, never ended up happening. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that they just kind of told him to chill out and we'll figure something out. But shipping off PJ Tucker, which again never really got in contact with the team outside of where are we going. So they were able to get off of PJ Tucker's contract. They were able to get KJ Martin, a very young, promising forward, in my opinion, that just hasn't had the ability to prove himself yet. But then Josh Richardson, who's coming to Utah, will never see a Jazz uniform because he was waived shortly after this trade was finalized because they needed to make the room to get KJ Martin. But now to the game. Brandon Pazinski, he had 29 points, 6 rebounds, and 4 assists. And Steph Curry had 32 points, 1 rebound, and 7 assists, and still popped off as anticipated. But Utah fans were pleased by what they saw from their young players. Isaiah Collier had 20 points, 6 rebounds, and 11 assists. Jordan Clarkson was leading Utah in scoring with 31 points, 4 rebounds, and 5 assists. Walker Kessler had 15 points, 18 rebounds, and 3 blocks. And then Keontae George had 26 points, 3 rebounds, and 6 assists off the bench. Now, with just a minute and 25 seconds left, Utah was down 124 to 122. If it wasn't for a key 3 with 26.1 seconds left, Utah would have lost this one. But after some clutch free throws from John Collins, who had 19 points, 5 rebounds, and 2 assists, led to the narrow 131 to 128 win. And even with this win, a lot of fans who were pro Tank, Tank note, poop for Coop, uh, this win devastated them. But this gave them their 12th win of the season. I'm not too concerned. They're still, at the time of this recording, there's still roughly about 20 more games, maybe 30 more games left in the season. Yeah, 30 more games. 30 more games left in the season. So I'm not too concerned. And Utah has arguably one of the hardest schedules left in the NBA. So I expect them to struggle. But every win will count going down the line. And, if Utah ends up getting the second worst record and not getting the first overall pick, these are the type of wins that fans will come back to and say, we should have lost this one. But after that game, Utah then started a 3-game road trip, starting with Phoenix. Phoenix did not have Bradley Beal or Kevin Durant, and Utah had a majority of their starters outside of Colin Sexton, who still is dealing with an ankle injury. This felt like this game was within reach. And if you thought that, you're wrong. Fast forwarding to the fourth quarter, Utah was getting easy inside the paint shots, while Phoenix was just relying on Grayson Allen to hit 3 after 3 after 3. Collier, he made a mid-range fadeaway shot to give Utah a 120 to 116 lead with 4.1 seconds left. Phoenix, they took a timeout, put the ball in Grayson Allen's hands, and he hit a 3 with 2 seconds left to go. So now the score is 120 to 119. Jazz take a timeout, and Utah is fouled immediately and sends Lauri Markkanen to the free throw line. He ends up making both, and a lot of people argued that he should have missed the second one because then you wouldn't have had enough time to corral it and get a timeout, what have you. But he made the second one, gave Phoenix the opportunity to call the timeout, advance the ball, and then they put Royce O'Neal to inbound it. He got it to Grayson Allen in the opposite wing from him, and he scored the 3 as the buzzer went off, sending us into overtime with a final regulation score of 122 to 122. Now, after that, it was all Devin Booker, which he had 47.6 rebounds and 11 assists, and the Phoenix Suns after that point starting into overtime as they ended up winning 135 to 127. Even though that is a very large stat line from Devin Booker, Jazz fans can still look at some of their own guys and still be impressed, like Walker Kessler. He had 19 points, 22 rebounds, 4 assists with 3 blocks, with 9 of those rebounds being offensive. And then Isaiah Collier having 15 points, 4 rebounds, and 13 assists. Their next game was against the Los Angeles Clippers, and they just absolutely got embarrassed. It was the second night of a back-to-back, and they lost 130 to 110. I don't really want to dive too much into that game because there wasn't really too much that was exciting. But now the game that the NBA world was honed in on Monday, arguably one of the largest and biggest talked about games of the season. It was the debut of Luka Doncic for the Los Angeles Lakers, and the Jazz just so happened to be their opponent that night. But coming off of an injury, Doncic was on an undisclosed minutes restriction, but you could see that there was still a bit of a rust on him, but he still put up 14 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists in 24 minutes. But someone that did take advantage of those bright lights was Jordan Goodwin of the Lakers. He had 22 minutes played last night. He put up 17 points, 8 rebounds, and 1 assist on 8 of 11 shooting and 1 of 2 from the perimeter. Even with Los Angeles getting the 132 to 113 win over Utah, Jazz fans can be happy to know that Collier is definitely developing as he extends his streak of 7+ assists to 19 straight games. And you can thank that stat to Art Takes Note. He is phenomenal with keeping up with those sort of stats and jackpotting around. He's great at everything he does. So if you like what I do here, you should check out what he's doing out over there. So thank you for that stat, Art. But now for the Jazz's upcoming games, their next game is going to be tomorrow on Wednesday, February 12th at home versus those same Lakers. So are we going to see a revenge game from the Jazz? Are we going to see more minutes out of Doncic? Or is it just going to be a rest night because it's right before the All-Star break? But the Jazz also have a game on Thursday, February 13th versus the Clippers at home, which this game was originally not on the schedule. This game was rescheduled due to the fires in Los Angeles. which I think is kind of crazy that 2 years in a row the Jazz have had games rescheduled for the day before the All Star break starts. With last year being with Golden State after one of their assistant coaches unexpectedly passed away due to cardiac arrest. So just like last year, Keontae George, he's going to have the same regimen. It's a back to back, along with going straight onto a plane to head to All Star Weekend, which you can catch George during the Rising Stars Challenge on Friday, February 14th. If you don't have any Valentine's Day plans, just turn on TNT around 7 p.m. Mountain Time, and you'll be able to see Keontae ball out. Now, with the Jazz out of the way, we're going to talk about the Utah Hockey Club. Uh, they played their final home game before the Four Nations break on Tuesday, February 4th, against the Philadelphia Flyers. This was the first game back for Dylan Guenther, who had been out for the last 12 games due to injury. And with Guenther's return, Lawson Krause became a healthy scratch, which for some is great and for others confusing. In my opinion, he just hasn't been living up to the responsibility of having an A on his sweater. So this reset, in my opinion, was very much needed. But Philly got the scoring going early in the first with Rodrigo Abels. Let's get the names right. Rodrigo Abels getting his first goal of the season, which is kind of disappointing to see this late in the season giving up the first goal, but it's bound to happen. But coming into the second period, Mikhail Sergachev gave us one of his signature celebrations and tied it up 1-1. But we didn't have much time to celebrate that goal as Tyson Forster put Philly back up 2-1 just about a minute after that goal from Sergachev. So again, didn't have much time to celebrate. But as the pressure was stacking up in the third, Guenther got back into his comfort zone and he got a goal to tie things up to our final score at the end of regulation, 2-2. Now, overtime, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Overtime seems to be Utah's comfort zone and has fans sweating every single time. And especially with how late this one went, we got all the way into the final minute. But who else but Dylan Guenther to return and score the game-winning goal as time expired to cap off this one in the homestand with an overtime win, 3-2. Which for some reason that score just seems to happen so often for the hockey club, but at least they are on the winning side of this one this time, getting the 2 points. Now, with that being the last home game, Utah still has a couple more games ahead, and they went on the road to take on the Columbus Blue Jackets, who they lost to a week earlier in overtime, 3-2. See, it's a common score, common scenario, so it was nice to be on the winning end against Philly. So for the Blue Jackets, Justin Danforth, he started the scoring early in the first, and Utah would not have a response going into the first intermission as they were down 1-0. Early in the second, Lawson Krause, who was back from being the healthy scratch from the previous game, gets a score off of Josh Doan and Michael Kesselring to tie things up 1-1. And shortly after the halfway mark of the second period, Oli Mata gets his second goal of the season as he puts that one up on the board, giving Utah the 2-1 lead. As the second period was coming to a close, Ivan Provorov was just able to get a shorthanded goal to tie things up before the intermission. And in the third period, there was nothing to light up those goals, and the lamps were cold. So we get yet another overtime game as at the end of regulation, we were tied 2-2. Now, like I just stated earlier, Utah fans, they're just used to sweating it out in the overtime period. Because again, the hockey club just is comfortable there for some reason. But with a minute left, Columbus was really applying a lot of pressure. And after a loose puck came out, Connor Ingram decided to leave the cage and came out pretty far. Like it was almost questionable. If this move didn't work, you'd probably be wondering why he came out that far. But Ingram, he was able to get the outlet pass out to, guess who? Dylan Guenther, who shot the puck off of the opposing goalie's pad, got the rebound, and tucked it over the other shoulder, and got the game-winning goal in overtime. 3-2 win Utah. Again, that 3-2 score in overtime, it's just reoccurring, and it's stressful. Now, Saturday's game, Utah fans would probably like to forget that one. 7-3 loss to Carolina. Last time that Utah saw Carolina, we had a very amazing game from Karel Vejmelka, which got a little ticket here to commemorate that game, which for those of you who don't remember, that is when he set his career high in saves with 49. Um, but Josh Doan and Clayton Keller, they were able to get some power play goals in there, and Keller was able to get a second goal that was unassisted in that match. But again, even with those goals, Utah lost 7-3. It is just a rough outing in general. But for their final game before the Four Nations break on Sunday, they took on the best team in the East, the Washington Capitals. Now, last time these teams met, the Capitals got the win, but they left with an injured Alex Ovechkin. And spoiler alert, Ovechkin didn't get hurt this time. So don't hate us. This matchup, it felt like an NHL 25 game set on rookie as Josh Doan, Michael Carcone, and Jack McBain were all able to score within the first 7 minutes of the game, with Doan and Carcone's goals coming within 32 seconds of each other. And even though there's a lot of emphasis between those three, Tom Wilson, he did score a goal in the middle of those three goals, uh, and that came off of a power play for Washington. And Pierre-Luc Dubois, he also got a power play goal in the midst of all of that, but that was all just in the first period. So they were able to finish off the period 3-2. Then in the second period, off the power play, again, this man, the moment he comes back from injury, he's involved in everything. Dylan Guenther gets the power play goal to give Utah the 4-2 lead. And with a 4-2 lead, you would think that that would be comfortable enough, but unfortunately, it is not. As about 5 minutes into the third period, Dylan Strome, he got a goal to bring the lead down to 1 for Utah. And then in the final minute and a half of the game, the man who got the first goal for the Capitals got the last goal for them in regulation. Tom Wilson got the goal to tie it up 4-4 to send this one into overtime. Now, overtime, again, super, super stressful. Utah just loves to be in overtime. But 5 minutes went by, no one scored. So Utah got their third shootout of the season. Now, Utah's record in shootouts is 0-2, which is not a very good stat to see. But the Capitals, they got the first shot with Pierre-Luc Dubois. He went ahead and tried to get one past Vejmelka, and it did not work. Went right into his glove. So then it was Utah's turn with Nick Schmaltz, and with the wrist shot, he was able to get it in no problem to give Utah the 1-0 lead during the shootout. And then Alexei Protas, he tried to get one past Vejmelka as well. Didn't go through. So now Utah needs to score this next one to get the win. And Clayton Keller, put it in the hands of the captain to get the win. And he tried to get that snapshot in, and it went wide left. So now the Capitals have one more chance to get that in, and it was up to Dylan Strome, who tried the same move as Dubois and Protas. And just like those two, it didn't go through. And Utah got their first shootout win in franchise history. Getting the 5-4 win over the best team in the East, which is phenomenal. And I mean, what else can you really say? It's absolutely great. So, as I stated, this was the last game before the Four Nations break. So now Utah won't have another game until Saturday, February 22nd. For those of you keeping track at the time of this recording, that is 11 days away. So if you do want to go ahead and cheer on, you have the Four Nations break, and that's where you will have USA, Canada, Finland, and Sweden all competing in essentially an all-star tournament. You do have 2 Utah players that are involved in that tournament, in Olli Mata and Juuso Välimäki. So if you are just itching for some hockey, by all means, that's probably going to be your best bet. But if you are just invested in the Utah team, and not necessarily just the individual players. Again, their next game won't be until Saturday, February 22nd at the Los Angeles Kings. But that is your being on the scene with the Jazz going into their All-Star break and the Hockey Club going into their Four Nations break. We're going to be looking a little slim, but I do have a guest lined up for our next episode, and you don't want to miss it. He's going to give us some insight into a different world of the sports industry that maybe you're not too familiar with. But if you take a look at my display, you could probably use some hints on what industry you may work in. And that will be your hint for the next episode. But that is your Bean on the Scene. I am Alma Bean, and y'all enjoy the rest of your day.